Ravina is with us. Ravina, you have an update on the situation of human rights in DRC. You have a report, in fact.
We do. Good morning, everyone. You should have received the report already in English and in French alongside the, the press release. It makes for very difficult reading, and I do encourage you to read the report in its entirety. The Human Rights Council in February this year asked our office to establish a fact-finding mission on the escalation of hostilities in North and South Kivu provinces of the DRC. Our report today covers the period between January and July of 2025 this year. The FFM's work is also intended to serve as a foundation for the Commission of Inquiry that was mandated by the same resolution of the Human Rights Council to in turn conduct comprehensive investigations into events since 2022. The report finds that gross human rights violations and violations of international humanitarian law have been committed by all parties to the conflict, by the M23, supported by the Rwanda Defense Forces, as well as by the Congolese armed forces and affiliated armed groups. The M23 armed groups, with training, material, intelligence, and operational support from the Rwandan Defense Forces, captured major cities in North and South Kivu. The group engaged in a campaign of intimidation and violent repression through a recurrent pattern of summary executions, torture, detention, and forced disappearances, and forced recruitment targeting anyone perceived as opposing the M23, regarded as a threat to its notion of order and security, or deemed fit to fight or serve the movement. M23 members also systematically carried out widespread sexual violence, including gang rape and sexual slavery. Women and girls were disproportionately targeted, but men, boys, and LGBT individuals were also victims of sexual violence, including in detention. Hundreds of children were detained by M23, and young males were forcibly recruited. The report exposes the enormous toll of the conflict on children of all ages. Daily violations across the entirety of the territory under the M23's control followed discernible, recurring patterns indicating a high degree of organization, planning, and resource mobilization. We have reasonable grounds to believe that the M23 members may have committed the crimes against humanity of murder, severe deprivation of liberty, torture, rape and sexual slavery, enforced disappearance, and deportation or forcible transfer of population. The report also documents grave violations committed by the DRC armed forces and affiliated groups, such as the Wazalendo, including deliberate killings of civilians. It identifies a pattern of widespread use of sexual violence by them as well, mainly gang rape and rape against women and girls, and looting by members of the FARDC and Wazalendo during their retreat from the front lines in January and February. Perpetrators operated in large groups and in multiple localities simultaneously. Wazalendo armed groups also recruited children under the age of 15 and used them in hostilities. The children were used in combat and in support roles, with girls also used for sexual purposes. The report finds that both DRC and Rwanda bear responsibility for their support to armed groups with known track records of serious abuses, and for failing to meet their obligations to take all measures to ensure respect for international humanitarian law and to protect civilians from harm. Specifically, the report stresses that Rwanda is responsible for violations directly committed by its armed forces on the territory of the DRC. We have received credible allegations concerning the covert presence of RDF personnel within the M23. The report also states that the DRC bears responsibility not only for the violations committed by its armed forces, but also by its affiliated armed groups, to the extent that their members acted under its direction or control. Our findings underscore the gravity and widespread nature of violations and abuses committed by all parties to the conflict, including acts that may constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. The report highlights the lack of focus on accountability and support for victims in the peace agreement that was signed between the DRC and Rwanda on the 27th of June. The atrocities described in this report are horrific. It is heartbreaking and deeply frustrating to witness once again the dehumanization of the civilian population by those in power who are failing in their responsibilities. It is imperative to promptly and independently investigate all allegations of violations, with a view to ensuring accountability and victims' rights to truth, justice, and reparations, and especially guarantees of non-repetition.
Truly a hard reading, huh? Really. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's open the floor to questions. Jeremy was first, sorry, and Nina.
Hi, Ravina. Just to make sure I get that right, yeah, right there. You mentioned specifically crimes against humanity that were committed by M23 forces. You also mentioned that every party committed violations of human rights. I'd like to understand, to make sure that I get that right. Crimes against humanity by M23, do the Congolese forces also committed crimes against humanity, or only war crimes? I want to make sure that I understand correctly. And also, we know that there had been an agreement that was signed in Washington, but to your knowledge, do those crimes are still ongoing in the east of DRC as we speak? Thank you.
Thank you. Indeed, we have, on the basis of the information that we've been able to gather, as I said, the crimes against humanity, we do have reasonable grounds to believe that the M23 members may have committed the crimes against humanity of murder, severe deprivation of liberty, torture, rape, and sexual slavery, enforced disappearance, and the deportation or forcible transfer of population. Now, while the report does not find crimes against humanity, it does not find that the threshold of crimes against humanity is easily met based on the evidence that we have managed to gather with regards to the FARDC, with the armed forces of the DRC. This does not take away from the seriousness of the issue. We have only been able to come to these determinations based on the information we've been able to gather in this very short period of time. So it does not take away from the seriousness of the violations that have been committed. The scale, the geographic spread, the number of victims, the repetitive nature of these crimes are very serious. And there are structural problems that have existed in the DRC for a very long time that have been neglected. The serious impunity with which these groups have been operating in the past have also been neglected. And these are things that need to be addressed as soon as possible. On the peace deal, I'm sorry, I missed your question there exactly.
It's still happening now that we are talking, while we are talking. Maybe something that happened also after.
So what we have unfortunately seen after the signing of the peace deal is a continuation of violations. In fact, I believe at the noon briefing just on Wednesday this week, the Secretary General's spokesperson highlighted the continuing commission of violations, particularly in South Kivu, and the continued commission also of sexual violence. I think one important thing that he highlighted too was the lack of support services for victims of sexual violence due to the lack of funding for these support services. So, sexual violence has always been very difficult to document everywhere in any conflict, and this is particularly the case in the DRC because of the stigma to which the victims of sexual violence are subjected. But now we're also facing a situation where they don't even have access to the meager support services that they used to get. So there are no kits, for example, available to them in medical centers. And these are the kinds of places where we would go as well to try to document the scale of the sexual violence that has been perpetrated. In the report, you'll also see that the M23 has been targeting human rights defenders and civil society organizations. And again, these are people who would normally provide support and services to victims, but they themselves are being targeted.
Yeah, and maybe I just I would just add in reference to what Ravina said, that is indeed on Wednesday that Stéphane Dujarric read this at the noon briefing, and I think it's important to answer your question, Jeremy. He said Meanwhile, on what is going on, so now in the eastern part of the DRC, our humanitarian colleagues say that continued violence in the eastern province of South Kivu continues to claim civilian lives and drive new displacement. In the northern part of the province, in Kalehe territory, our partners on the ground report that clashes between armed groups persisted as recently as yesterday, so that would be Tuesday. According to local sources, at least 22 women were raped during armed clashes in several villages in the territory between 22nd and 31st August, just where we are speaking almost. Our local partner report that the victims did not receive medical care, which was what you were saying, no assistance, within the critical 72-hour period following the incidents, amid shortages of resources, including medical supplies and security constraints. Sadly, due to recent funding cuts, more than half of the gender-based violence services have been suspended across the country. The violence also forced nearly 23,000 human beings to flee their homes, which is in addition to the more than 128,000 people who already been displaced in this province between May and August. In this territory, we and our humanitarian partners are providing nutrition support, health care, and assistance in agricultural recovery. Then it continues with the other figures in the neighboring territory of Walungu, and I can send you all the figures if you want. But the one thing I wanted to underline is that the 2025 Humanitarian Response Plan, which seeks $2.5 billion to assist 11 million people, is currently funded at less than 15%. With only 376 million received up to Wednesday, basically. This shortage in funding severely limits our ability to reach all the people who are in desperate need.
Alessandro, if I could just add, this is the paragraph I was looking for in the report, paragraph 78. If you want clarity on the qualification of crimes in relation to the FARDC, the Armed Forces of the DRC, please refer to paragraph 78, where it's explained quite well.
Thank you. I saw Body and then Nina.
Well, I have a question on another topic.
In this case, let's continue with the DRCs, please. And I won't forget it, but maybe I'll give the floor to Nina now.
Yeah, thanks, Ravina. I was wondering what kind of response you've received from the DRC after this. I assume you've submitted it to them and also to Rwanda, given that the DRC was also the one who asked for the session creating the fact-finding mission. And then when it comes to the commission of inquiry that has yet to be constituted, could you sort of say what the impact will be if this fact-finding mission now ends its work and there's nothing to take its place? Thank you.
Thanks, Nina. Yes, we did receive responses from both the DRC authorities as well as the Rwandan authorities. On the details of those responses, of course, I would ask you to contact them directly, and on whether these responses can be published or not as well. That would be something to be determined. But we did receive responses from both of them. And we did receive access. So the fact-finding mission did conduct missions to the DRC, to Rwanda, and to Burundi, in fact. And we do thank the governments for their facilitation of these missions and for their cooperation. Regrettably, we did not get access to refugee sites in Uganda, and the FFM were also denied access to Goma by the M23's leadership, and we could therefore not visit the areas controlled by the M23. On the Commission of Inquiry, I think the findings of this report drive home just how serious the situation is. We were all following it, but the extent, the scope, the scale of the violations, the degree of just systematic conduct of these violations, the complete impunity. What I've read out only highlights some of the elements in this report, but of course you're also aware of the jailbreaks of perpetrators of very serious violations of human rights and international humanitarian law as well, who are on the loose. This report should drive home the importance of accountability and justice for these violations. It is crucial that the Commission of Inquiry is adequately funded and is able to carry out its mandate.
Laurent?
Yeah, thank you, Ravina. Kind of follow up to that, because it was the decision to postpone the formal launch of the COI was part of the measures that were decided by the High Commissioner because of the liquidity crisis. So could you explain a little bit more why this particular one, which is the only country situation that was a part of that package, why he decided a few months ago to decide to postpone that one, and does he regret now, given the scope and the importance of the violations that are underlined, to have taken that decision? And then lastly, has the FFM compiled a list of potential individual perpetrators, or has it planned to let that task to the potential future COI? Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Laurent. In fact, it's an opportunity to clarify some things. The office was mandated by the Human Rights Council to carry out these tasks, these very crucial tasks, to try to document exactly what happened. And particularly in these conflict situations, as you know, the facts are among the biggest casualties, right? You have propaganda from all sides. So it is crucial that we as the UN Human Rights Office are able to objectively assess what exactly happened, what the violations were, what they amount to, what attribution of responsibility where possible as well. We were given this very important mandate, but we were not given the funding to discharge this mandate. In fact, you have seen the High Commissioner has spoken about what a dire funding situation we're in. We're having to cut our presences, we're having to cut the contracts of staff as well. In spite of this situation, we carried out the work of the fact-finding mission. And you have seen the results of this work. We have tried to spotlight just how dangerous and difficult the situation has been and remains in the country. So it is crucial that the Commission of Inquiry that was mandated by member states is also adequately funded by member states to be able to do its work properly, to try to advance the cause of justice and prevention of further gross human rights violations in the country. On the names, yes, the fact-finding mission did receive some names of individuals or contingents that are responsible. It's keeping those names for now, and will determine further what to do with them as the situation evolves. If there is a commission of inquiry that is adequately funded, and you might be aware that the ICC, the International Criminal Court, is also engaged on the situation in the DRC.